Hi, welcome. This is the Indiana History Project. I'm your guest host, Rowena Cross-Najafi, and today we're in one of my favorite places, the Lawrence County Museum of History. It's at 929 15th Street in Bedford. We have with us here at the museum gallery coordinator, volunteer gallery coordinator, Rebecca Buher.
Hello.
Welcome, Becky.
Thank you.
And Becky's going to talk to us about the museum's latest exhibit, which is called Letters Home. But before we talk about the exhibit, Becky, tell us about the letters that the exhibit is based on.
The letters were done during the Civil War, and they were donated by a great-great-grandchild of the writer.
Actually, I remember that day. You thinking about the day that they came in with all the letters in the shoebox?
Well, I wasn't here that day, so I heard about it a little later.
That was pretty thrilling. How many letters are there? Over 100.
Oh, there's over
I know
100,
that.
yes.
Yeah, and they were all in this shoebox about this big.
Mm-hmm.
And they still had their original, they were on Civil War stationery, like Union stationery with
Liberty and Save the Union and that sort.
Patriotic messages sort of printed on them, and that paper is just so thin, it was like, I don't know, you could see through it. You could probably make windows
it's like
out of
onion
it.
skin paper.
Onion skin paper. And some of the stamps were even still on. Somebody had cut off stamps for a stamp collection at some point, but incredible collection.
The donor's stepfather, had cut off the stamps for his stamp collection when he was a teenager. His name was James Aldridge, and the donor, his stepdaughter, is Susan McCoy.
And it was Susan McCoy and her husband who came in and dropped, well, they didn't drop them off. They came in and talked to us for quite some time about the letters, and it was pretty amazing. Now, who wrote all of these letters?
Silas H.H. Mathis, and in the letters he's called Henry. He writes them to his girlfriend in Bedford. Her name was Hester Ann Rogers, and she was called Annie.
So there is a Lawrence County connection, a significant Lawrence County connection to the letters then, right?
There sure is. She lived on the corner of 16th and L Street, which is just kind of behind the Presbyterian Church now. The house is no longer there.
Mm-hmm. That's unfortunate.
Yes.
And I believe we call him Henry, even though I always want to call him Silas because his first name is Silas. But actually, he goes by Henry and she goes by Annie, right?
That's correct.
So Henry, did he have a Bedford connection as well?
He came to Bedford when he was about 16 years old. He lived at the time in Owen County, and he came to Bedford to get a better education. And most likely he lived with his uncle, James Mathis, who was an editor of a Christian newspaper at the time, and he also was a teacher at the school at the Christian church. So he learned, he went to high school here. Henry went to high school here, and then he also learned the printing trade through his uncle.
Do you remember which newspaper it was? Was it the Independent or
that he owned?
That the uncle owned?
Oh, it was a Christian Monitor or Christian.
Okay.
Anyway,
but it was it had significant circulation.
Oh, it was very widely circulated. It was very popular, and actually the descendant of it is still in existence today.
Oh, that's neat. Well, what is the descendant?
I wish I knew.
but not in Bedford.
No, not in Bedford. It's a publication that's.
Well, one of the really significant things that struck me about the letters, even from that very first day, is how articulate Henry is. And
yes.
You can tell he's a newspaper man because yes. he doesn't just talk about the weather, although there's some weather, and he talks about real stuff that you really want to know.
He sure does. He talks about the different battles that he was in, and he talks about, he's concerned about Annie, and he's concerned about other members of his family who are serving in the war. But he gives you real war news that wouldn't have been possible to get without
right.
the personal touch.
Right, and later on, I think you couldn't get that kind of news past the censors because there's no evidence.
Probably not.
No evidence that any of these letters were censored, right?
No, yeah. Not at all. The only thing that would be like that is that took months to get here. So the war or whatever he was talking about was over.
That part would have been over.
Uh-huh.
But if you think about it, had the letters been intercepted by the enemy,
Oh, yes,
At
that
some
would have
point,
been a
right
real-
after he handed them over to whoever he handed them to.
Exactly.
They could have easily been used against the Union forces.
Sure.
Now, I remember that Henry was a very staunch Union supporter.
Oh, yes, he was.
And he has a few choice things to say about the Copperheads, right?
Yes, the Southern sympathizers who were here. And even in the book that we have of the letters, published the letters, we have a glossary of all of those terms that were things that we're not familiar with today, but Copperheads and that sort of thing.
Right, and we never think about Bedford or Lawrence County being really close to the Confederacy, but evidently there were lots of Southern sympathizers in the county. Either that or Henry was paranoid.
Probably a little of both.
Yeah, but what I found really funny is the way that he was all exercised about all the Copperheads in Bloomington. You know, it's another case of where we think that Bloomington is different from us. You know, we are the not Bloomington. And it was very funny that in 1861 or 62, you know, he was writing like that.
Well, at one point the family lived in Monroe County, so he probably had a connection there and he knew of people.
Yeah, so he knew specific people. How long did he serve in
He
the
served
military?
from 61 to 64. He served 3 years of service. There was a time period with the Indiana, and then it became a federal troop.
So when he first enlisted, he enlisted here in Bedford, right?
Yes, he did.
With a group of people, many of whom were also from here.
Oh, yes, I'm sure most of the people
What
were
was
from
his
here.
regiment?
It was Company 15, 15th Regiment, Company F
Company F, 15th Indiana
Regiment.
Regiment.
Volunteer.
And they were infantry, right?
Yes, they were.
So at the beginning of the war, he was just a regular foot soldier like everybody
Oh,
else.
yes, he was.
And do you remember some of the battles that he fought in?
I do. I have a list. He fought in the Battle of Cheat Mountain, and that's in West Virginia. He was in the Battle of Shiloh in Tennessee, Corinth in Mississippi, Perryville, Kentucky. His troop was there, but he was ill at that time. He didn't participate in that. He was at the Battle of Stones River. He talks about being just laying on the ground. They didn't even have blankets at that time.
Wow.
And he was in Tullahoma, Tennessee, Chickamauga, which was an awful battle in Georgia, Chattanooga, and Missionary Ridge. He was in all of those.
Well, one of the things that I think really comes through in the exhibit that I would like everybody to think about is, unlike today's military, when you enlisted in the Civil War, you enlisted with a whole lot of people you already knew. These were your friends, your neighbors, in some cases your brothers, maybe even father-son combinations, because the units mustered in a particular place. Mustered meaning they marched off, right? They organized and marched off. Yeah. So this unit, the 15th, organized in Bedford in 1861.
I believe, yes.
June, right, or something, close, early summer.
Mm-hmm.
And all these guys who came from places like Bedford and Mitchell and Olytic and Tunnelton and Heltonville, and now I'm in trouble because I'll miss some, but you know all the towns we're talking about. I could go look at the high school letter jackets and list every single one of them. All these guys probably pretty much knew each other
Oh, I'm sure they did.
already.
I'm sure they did.
And as Henry is writing back with news, he's giving not just his own news, but the news of other people,
Sure.
right?
And oftentimes when soldiers would write home, the letters would be published in the newspaper. I don't know whether that happened at the time with his letters, but some of the letters he says, now this is just for you, Annie. So obviously there were other times they were shared with lots of people.
Well, I suspect the expectation was that they would be shared with everybody, because everybody here was very concerned with how our boys were doing, you know, or our men in this case. Because that unit, whatever else was happening in the war, that unit and the other units that mustered here were very important to the people here.
Sure. The Christian church sent Bibles to them and hoped that they would be able to read them.
And we know, did he get one?
Yes, he did.
He did, very
He
good.
said he was going to try. He was
Oh,
going
I
to try
see.
to read it. He was always involved with the Christian church here and almost everywhere he lived. So that was important. I believe it was Captain Short that arranged to have those Bibles sent. He was, in the letters, he sometimes asks for, or says his boots have worn out, and they needed that sort of thing. Women would send that, and that socks and whatever they could knit or make to help out. In fact, there was a cartridge shop on the State House lawn for the Indiana troops, and women were part of the people who packed those cartridges. I believe, if I'm correct, that Indiana provided more soldiers than any other state during the Civil War.
I remember reading that. And there's another great statistic about Springville, which those of you who don't know us don't know that Becky and I both have Springville ties.
Yes, we do.
What's the Springville connection?
Every registered voter volunteered to serve in the Civil War. Now, that means they were all men, and they probably all didn't actually serve, but everybody volunteered, 100%.
And they were all over 21, right? Because
yes,
to be a
they would
registered
have to
voter at the time, you had to be 21. So that doesn't even include all the young men who went.
Younger,
we know
yes.
They went
yes.
as young as, in some cases, 14 or 15, maybe not from Springville. But so some of the themes that come through in the letters that I recall, and you may come up with some more. Faith, we talked about the church.
Yes.
And Annie had a faith connection too, right?
Yes, she went through the same church, and she often wrote, well, he responds about her singing lessons at the church. I don't know whether it was her uncle was the teacher, but anyway, that was a big deal apparently. And let's see.
Is that where they met? At church, as far as we know?
I would guess that was. We really don't know how they met.
Because they already knew each other,
right.
Obviously. Yeah.
She was pretty young. He would have been about 21 when he entered the service, and she was probably 15. So,
wow.
So in some of the letters, he even asks her, he says, I don't know how old you are.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So I think she would have been 19 when he got married.
When they got married. Although we're telling the story ahead of time, but yes, they do end up
yes,
getting married.
They do.
This story has a happy ending. Maybe not a happy ending for all the other people in that unit, but at least for our Henry and
right.
Annie, it does end happily. But anyway, so one of the things that they share, and one of the things that undoubtedly gave him strength was faith, right? And of course, the other was hope. Which was fulfilled finally. Henry had great hopes for the relationship with Annie. He wanted to live through the war. He was really, really motivated to live through the war, marry her, and have children, which is exactly what they ended up doing.
He did.
Bought a farm and lived their life.
And the Union was preserved. That was really important to him.
Okay, let's talk about preserving the Union. We think now, I think looking back, that it was obvious from day one that the Union would be preserved, right? That the North would win the war. But in fact, that was not so obvious, right?
No, it was not.
Can we tell that from Henry's letters?
Well, he's worried about different places. He doesn't, he only talks about where he is currently and doesn't know what's happening other places.
So he has a very micro view of the war, you think?
Well, kind of. There was one time he talks about why was Rosecrans why was he replaced by Thomas? He didn't know that, and that had to do with the Battle of Chickamauga.
So what we get in the letters, one of the other things that we get from the letters is an individual foot soldier's view.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But Henry does not stay an infantryman.
No, he does not.
And which is good. I mean, he gets promoted because that's a long time. He enlists in 1861, and then we haven't mentioned this yet, but he serves until
64.
Summer of 1864, right? So that's 3 years. That's a long time under war conditions.
Yes.
And so he must have been, we know he was a smart guy. He certainly writes really well. But he must have also been capable, because when they were trying out new technology, he ends up getting in on that, right?
Yes, and that new technology was part of the up-and-coming Signal Corps.
Yeah.
Before that, the only technology they had were the flags, and they would stand on the hills and make messages back and forth across the hills, which were not always very reliable. The new technology was the telegraph, and he was part of learning how to do that, setting wire, sending messages.
Yeah, because all those signals were wired signals, right? There was no
Apparently,
wireless.
Yeah, you had this battery in this covered wagon, and all the equipment was in there, and they moved that from place to
Big
place.
old coil of wire that
Right.
you just don't.
Right.
I served in the Signal Corps actually long enough ago that it was still kind of like that. We didn't have horses or anything, you know. The wagons had, they were pulled by trucks, but still, you know, that
Same
thing
sort
with
of
the
thing.
wire was rather similar, yeah.
Well, he went to Washington, D.C. to train for that, and was there for several months, and then he came back out to the what was the West, the Army of the Cumberland.
Well, I remember hearing something about the Beardsley telegraph machine, that these letters are very significant in any history of the Beardsley.
Yes, Beardsley was the telegraph system that they created, and it was pretty efficient. It was better than what they had before, but it didn't last very long because they came up with better ideas after that.
But the thing about the Beardsley, wasn't it that it didn't need Morse code, like they typed things in?
I guess
it was kind of like
it
a
was on sort of
typewriter
a dial
or something.
system.
Oh, like those label makers. You know,
kind
you
of like
dial A,
that,
yeah,
it looked
okay,
like, yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, that
It
makes
worked
sense,
well,
yeah,
yeah.
because anybody could understand it. You didn't have to know Morse code.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm sure Henry by this time was rather proficient at Morse code.
I expect he was.
And that is what they used in the Civil War, right? That was developed early
I'm
enough.
not sure on that.
I seem to remember that. All you Civil War people out there, you can let us know. if
Let
we've
us
got
know.
We've got this wrong, but that's what I remember. So Henry's out there rolling out the wire and setting up his telegraph, and then he has to do these really long shifts, right? Because they don't have very many people doing the telegraph. But I would guess this may be part of why he survived the war, because he was not probably in as much danger doing that as he would have been had he been engaged in combat that entire 3 years.
Right, I think when he became part of the Signal Corps, he wasn't on the front lines anymore.
Right, yeah, because you definitely wouldn't want those wires out there in the
No.
front. Yeah, you'd want it back where you could protect them.
A lot of his time was spent in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, or around there, and at some points he was stationed in the house that John Hunt Morgan's family in-laws
interesting.
lived in.
Yeah.
And then another times he was stationed at the courthouse itself, and they had encampments right on the courthouse lawn in Murfreesboro.
In any of the letters, do you see an awareness in him that the war has shifted or changed, that that somehow or another, because we know that there was a point in the Civil War where it started to become apparent that the South was at least suffering some real damage as the Southern cause, and that their military might not be able to hold out, too much longer. Does he talk about that?
At the end of the letter, towards the end of the letters that we have, he talks about Lee and how the movement seems to be changing, and Sherman's coming in, so he's seeing some of that.
So he's aware, and any idea how close to the actual end that is? I mean, he leaves before the actual
Before it's
end.
over,
Yeah.
yes, he's
before
out.
the surrender, he's out. That's true. So Annie, in the meantime, we don't have her letters.
No, we wish she wrote all the time, and apparently they came home, but they've been lost.
Yeah, we believe she was a faithful correspondent
Oh,
because
I'm sure.
he refers to letters that she sent him.
Yes, he does.
But he couldn't keep them on his person
I would think not.
for whatever reason.
Yeah, I would think not.
He didn't keep any of them, right? As far
Well,
as we
I don't know. I thought there was an indication that she had him at one time after he returned, but for whatever reason, they're not available.
That she had her own letter?
She had her own too.
So maybe he was carrying them around? We
Well,
don't know.
I would think at least part of the time when he was stationed there in Murfreesboro, he might have been able to keep them. But they're lost now.
Probably our viewers don't realize what goes into taking a set of handwritten letters that are 150 years old and turning them into an exhibit and a book, which we need to talk about your book, which you've got sitting here. So let's go just for a second through the process. So I was there that wonderful day that we got the box of letters, right? And at some point, and that was in 2011, so that's already 3 years ago, which is the same length of time that Henry spent in the war. Is that interesting? Yeah, yeah. So the first thing we had to do is stabilize their condition because they were all folded up in 150-year-old paper, right? And so they've all been now opened out, flattened out, and properly stored in acid-free paper or some such thing. And then people started transcribing, right?
Yes.
And we had volunteers do that.
We did. You would think transcribe, why would you be transcribing English? But the letters were just written all around. Paper was so scarce.
Paper was precious.
And stamps were scarce, and they didn't get paid often, so they couldn't buy paper. So he wrote on every little inch of the paper.
And he had a lot to say.
He had a lot to say.
These are not, we have other letters that are like, you know, how are you, how are the kids, how were the crops, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Did you get the money I sent?
Yeah, did you get the money I sent, yeah. Which I don't think Henry got paid that often.
No, he didn't.
It kind of looks like he didn't. But so anyway, so here are these letters. A group of volunteers went through every single letter painstakingly, right? And typed and typed and typed until every word in every letter had been recorded digitally.
Yes.
So that anybody who wants to read them, you don't go to these 150-year-old letters, you go to the transcription.
Yes.
And photographs were made, or scans were made of every single letter.
Everyone was scanned.
So,
digitally, both the image and the transcription.
Right.
So it's,
yeah, so we have all of that recorded digitally. So if anything were ever to happen to the letters, which of course paper being what it is, nothing lasts forever.
That's correct.
We hope to be able to save them longer in this digital form. So then you took this digital form.
I did. I took the letters and put them in one long list so that you can go from the beginning of the letters to the very last one. And in addition to me creating that, we had lots of researchers who looked up all the people who were involved in the letters. That we have pictures of many of them. And we researched the Signal Corps and the company that he was in and his family. He had several members of his family and her family that served and are mentioned. So everybody that's mentioned in the letters, we have noted who they were and what their connection is.
So this was an enormous research project. I remember that Reba Butler helped you.
Yes, she did. She did
Spectrum
all of that.
Corporation helped us out with a couple of interns so that we could actually pay our college students to help us with some of the research. Our regular staff, Glenda Reynolds and Greg Nykerk, both worked on this for a long time.
And Annette Seib
worked hard. Matter of fact, I was just remembering, as we go through the letters, there comes a point where the communications are much more intimate. And the word love appears how many times? Didn't you have that counted?
I did have a count, but it seems like it was 1,000. I'm not sure exact number.
Yeah, and I remember Annette saying, "I can't stand all this lovey-dovey stuff." So you'd rather write about the war. Anyway, sorry, Annette, but that was a great effort.
It was.
So what has resulted from all of that? Hold up the book.
I'll hold up. I've got some tabs on here. I'm sorry about the tabs, but this is the book. It's Letters Home, and it's available in the gift shop. It's $30.
It's fascinating.
And it's more than just the letters. I think you really enjoy the history of the Civil War.
And the pictures of what happened to some of these people later. It's just a great piece of history. But, you know, we've been talking about the letters, and we really need to talk about the exhibit because we want you all to come see the exhibit while it's still up.
Right.
So let's talk about the exhibit a little bit. What's in it?
Well, the letters, of course. There's history of the Civil War. There's a DVD that you can see how the war changed, how the fields of who was winning, who was losing really changed over the years. And you can see that little video in 4 minutes. It's really interesting. The exhibit itself is in several parts. It's not just the letters. We tried to incorporate Civil War artifacts that we had here at the museum. So I have lots of things from other soldiers, not necessarily from the same company. For instance, we have a uniform from David Kelly, who was in the 67th Infantry. We have guns.
This is a real uniform.
The real ones, yes. These are
that he
ones
wore.
that were worn. We have equipment from Colonel Williams. He was in the 18th Infantry. A Bible from Joseph Gardner. A leather billfold that was picked up on the body of Elisha Guthrie, who died at Gettysburg. And there's many more. It's divided into what a soldier would have worn, how he would have lived, how the music was involved, how they began the day with revelry and ended up with taps, and they sang. The music was really important. It helped. The exhibit also has photography of the time period, and then there's sections on the Signal Corps itself.
That has to do with the war side, but you've also got some stuff on the home front.
We
right?
do. We also have a reproduction encampment of what Henry's camp scene might have looked like, and also set up from what we hope Annie's home, her living room might have looked like. She's sitting there holding her letter. And a lot of the reproduction things that we have in those scenes were donated by Barbara Baynes.
Oh, that's super. There's one very touching, I think it's all pretty touching, actually. I had the privilege of actually showing this exhibit to a group of people who were vision impaired, so I did the reading. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how emotional these things are if you read them out loud. This is a man who didn't know if he would live to see tomorrow.
Right.
And if any of his friends would live to see tomorrow, but he's going on hope. But the one very touching thing that I remember was the violets.
Yes, he writes that one day, he said, I think I'm doing the same thing you're doing. I was walking in the woods and I picked up violets, and I'm sending them to you because he loved her. And I think violets itself meant a message of love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And the text, I don't know if you marked it in your book.
Let me see if I can find it real quick.
It's a pretty wonderful text. But anyway, there were real 150-year-old violets in that envelope.
There were.
And
that was amazing.
It really, really grabs you.
I'll read that. Last Sunday, I was walking on the side of the hill near the spring where I found 2 violets, which I have preserved for you as a small token of regard, friendship, and love. Accept them, though they are valueless, yet speaking a language dearer, purer, holier than the most priceless gifts which might be bestowed by the lavish hand of wealth. They are all I have to offer now. Keep them and remember the donor.
Yeah, all I have to offer.
Yeah.
And remember the donor, as if he suspected he might not make it back.
No, of course, that's always a possibility.
But the happy truth is that he did make it back.
Yes, he did.
Now, we have a picture of Henry,
Yes, we do.
who, after you spend a while in Henry's head reading these letters, his appearance comes as quite a shock, doesn't it?
It does. He's much different than I might have thought. He's very, very thin, but
course,
that may
yeah,
have
that
been
makes sense.
because they were on half rations a lot of times. There wasn't.
Can you imagine doing what these
Yeah.
guys did on what they got fed?
No, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't imagine why they stayed. It was such a.
horrific condition. Well, I think they had to stay. Once you were enlisted, if you didn't stay, you'd get shot.
He
right?
does
People-
talk about a lot of that, about
yeah.
either traitors or spies,
Deserters.
or how, and they were immediately hanged.
Yeah, yeah. but you didn't want to be taken prisoner because it was
No,
even worse.
no.
Yeah, it's a pretty horrible time, and
Yeah.
we don't have any real ability to imagine that. I remember one day I was in here and a fellow came in with his little girl, and you know, she was kind of bouncing around the way kids do, and he had spent some time with the exhibit, and he said, boy, people really had it hard back then, didn't
Well,
they?
yes.
You know, I had no idea. So, and it's not really, it's not a gruesome exhibit or anything
no,
like that. It's
no.
just the truth of it is men went off to war with their friends and their neighbors and their brothers and their fathers, and they went through terrible, terrible hardships. They were hungry, they were cold, they fought, they killed people, or they were killed, or they were wounded, and we
Yes.
don't.
And many people died from disease
Yeah.
as much as from the injuries of the...
terrible suffering, terrible suffering. So if you are a Lawrence County native and your ancestors were here at the time of the Civil War, chances are really, really good that one of your ancestors fought in the Civil War.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because Lawrence County had just made a huge contribution to Indiana, and Indiana made a huge contribution to the Union.
Right.
We have some reenactors here in the area, and everybody who watches this show, I'm sure, will remember Norm Taylor, who started this program, the Indiana History Project, and who was an avid reenactor with his wife, Annette. And everyone will remember that we lost Norm a couple of years ago, way too early.
Yes.
But upstairs, as a partner exhibit to Letters Home, we have a really nice exhibit dedicated to the reenactors, right?
Yes, we do. Annette Taylor has generously provided us reenactment costumes, and we also included pictures of Norm and Annette and other volunteers who are reenactors. It's really a nice...
Oh, it's a really neat exhibit. Yeah, it's a neat exhibit. And I believe we used, well, you said Barbara Bayens gave us or lent us some of the reenactor items that we use
downstairs,
here
yes.
in the main exhibit as well. But so if you come to the Museum for Letters Home, don't neglect to go upstairs. That's a smaller exhibit. It's a small room. That's our community gallery, but it's well worth a look.
Yes, yes.
And if you if you were a friend of Norm Taylor's, you will just love some of the pictures of Norm in his element, sort of leading troops in his own way.
Yes, he did.
Wonderful, wonderful exhibit dedicated to a great Lawrence County historian. Now we also have, you talked about some of the uniforms, and the dress that Annie is wearing in the window is actually a reenactment dress,
Yes, it
right?
is. It is.
But this dress behind us is a real dress from the era, as I remember, from just before the 1860s.
Yes.
So we have some authentic things on display. It's a nice mix of authentic and reenactment in terms of the costumes, right?
And the flag behind here is authentic too, of the 67th Regiment.
Yeah, we don't know what happened to the 15th flag.
No. Well, actually, it's at the State House.
It's at the State House,
Yes.
is it?
Yes.
Do we have any idea how many units marched out of here?
No,
Altogether?
I'm sorry, I don't.
We know the 67th, we know the 15th, the 16th I think also, but I wouldn't swear to it. It would be interesting to know. I know only because when we went around to the cemeteries looking for tombstones, if you like old cemeteries, you should check out the Civil War tombstones. They'll have the designation
Yes,
on
they
them.
will.
And
And they are still honored every Veterans Day with the little flag.
With flags, which is wonderful. That's just wonderful. So anyway, anyone who wants to know more about the Civil War, really, there are lots of ways to do it. One is to come in here and spend some time with Henry and his letters. Another is to just walk around the cemeteries and see how many people are buried there. The Civil War tombstones are very characteristic. They're very easy to spot once you know what you're
Yes,
looking
they are.
for. So once you find
Yeah.
one, you can find lots of them. Anything else you would like to tell us about the exhibit or the process of putting the book together, the research? Well, let's talk about Reba for a second, because Reba Butler actually made a trip.
Yes, well, actually, she made a trip to Murfreesboro to investigate, and I went to Murfreesboro too another time at the National Park where the Stones River battle was actually.
So you went to the Stones
We
River
did.
battlefield?
We did it, and there's a cemetery there of Indiana soldiers that just, I believe it's the Hazen Brigade, that is just a small section there of a lot of Hoosiers who died.
How sad.
Yeah.
Now, were there members of the 15th?
And not in that one.
Not in that one.
I did not find any.
Yeah. Is that where, I remember that Reba talked to a scholar of the Signal Corps who said that he believed Henry's reference to the Beardsley Telegraph was the first recorded reference to that piece of technology.
Original documents, I think it
In
is the
original
first
documents.
ones.
Yeah, I think
He
that
was very pleased to find that, and,
Yeah.
and we are in touch with them, and we'll be in again.
Well, that's another good point, another good reason to do these kinds of projects that take a long time, is that in addition to being able to put them up for our community to enjoy, researchers are also very interested in the contents of any kind of original source material. So all those hours of taking Silas's tiny handwriting and typing up what he said and researching, in some cases, the people he refers to, are all very valuable to researchers. So it's all here if anyone wants to access it. Right?
One of the things when I was in Murfreesboro, I was at an archivist for that county, and he sent me. I have will be in touch with this person later. They were most interested because Henry refers to where Rosecrans headquarters, General Rosecrans headquarters were, and it appears that nobody knew exactly where they are. So this professor is very interested in a first-hand document of
another piece of the
another
puzzle.
piece of puzzle. They were really quite excited about that.
That's neat. Well, I think this book has sold pretty well.
It has.
So if you
It's
want a
done
copy,
well.
you need to be getting one.
Yes.
Actually.
Again, letters home.
Letters home. Yeah, there's a lot of information in it. It's a very touching story of the war, but it's also a story of the family then that Henry and Annie formed when they came back.
Yes,
right?
there's information about a few of the descendants. The picture of Henry we actually got from a great-great-grandson whose name is Henry again, and we weren't aware that there were descendants in the area. This group, Henry and his son Bob, live in Spencer, and they were really excited about the letters.
I bet. That's fantastic. When did Henry die? How long did he live after the
I believe it
war?
was 1901.
Oh, so a good long time.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, so 1901.
Yes, he did. I think.
I remember that Annie outlived him.
Yes, by about 5 years.
And you said that before she died, Annie did something with those letters.
She reread all of the letters. They were her most precious possession.
Which doesn't surprise me, because they're, in addition to being, of course, the way that their romance started, and I don't know when he proposed. I think he proposed in person when he was back on leave or something.
I think so.
Right?
They became engaged at one of his furloughs, which were very few. He kept wanting to come home and couldn't.
Oh yeah, in 3 years he'd be lucky to get back once. But also, it's a record of a romance in addition to a record of the war and to all the things that were going on in Henry's head during the war. It's a love story, and everybody loves a good love story.
That's right.
And I love a good love story.
Someone asked me the other day, why isn't this being made into a movie?
Well, maybe it will be. Maybe it will be. It would be a good movie.
It would be.
It's a good story.
It actually would be.
Okay, well, I think that just about wraps it up. Let me just recap for everybody out there. This is Becky Buher. She's our volunteer gallery coordinator at the Lawrence County Museum, and she has put together the most amazing exhibit based on the Civil War, based on these Civil War letters, but it will help you understand everything your ancestors who fought in the Civil War dealt with, experienced, and you'll also cheer for a young couple in love who actually it ends happily for us. It's a pretty great story. In addition, if you want to own a copy of the transcribed letters, they're all in this book, and we have a few copies of that left. This exhibit is up until
Middle of November.
Mid-November. So you will want to get in here before then. Don't show up at Thanksgiving and be mad, okay?
That's right. That's right.
We're telling you now, November, because we have to rotate these exhibits, you know, so that things keep fresh. So come in before mid-November. Don't forget about the reenactor exhibit upstairs, dedicated to Norm and Annette Taylor. And yes,
I want to thank Susan McCoy for being generous enough to realize the community would so appreciate these letters, and we thank her so much, and we thank all the volunteers who helped make this possible, and we thank the Mathis family in Spencer who provided a picture of Henry. So.
And Vectrin and
Vectrin, yes.
And our staff.
And our staff,
yeah,
yes.
The list goes on and on. We appreciate all your contributions, and it helps us to honor those sacrifices made so long ago by so many men and women in keeping our great country together.
That's right.
That's right. You know, we never think now that there was ever any threat, but there was. This was not a foregone conclusion, but it worked out. That worked out too for those of us, at least in the North. We think it worked out. Maybe if you were from, I don't know, Georgia, you wouldn't think it was quite such a happy outcome. The museum is open Tuesday through Friday, 9 to 4, Saturday, 9 to 3. We hope to see you there. We will be closed on Labor Day like everybody else. But we hope to see you here and really come see not just Letters Home, which is great, but all the other wonderful things that your county museum has to offer. So I'm Rowena Cross-Najafi. This has been the Indiana History Project. Thank you for watching.